The envelope was rigid and marked as certified mail. It was nestled beside a grocery store coupon and my water bill, yet it was the only item that felt substantial. I had just turned 34. It wasn't a landmark year, nothing worth any fuss. I had no real expectations for the day. Perhaps I'd get a card if my parents remembered, but maybe nothing. And yet something about that envelope gave me pause. The sender's address read my parents. Briefly, I allowed myself a flicker of hope. I carried it inside, placed it on the kitchen counter beside the flowers my assistant had sent, settled into a chair, and slowly opened it. Inside, there was no handwritten message, no birthday card, only a solitary, formally printed sheet. After careful reflection, we have made changes to our estate. Everything remaining is to go to Harper Valentine and her children. In light of my situation, I believe I can understand. Just 3 brief lines, no salutation, no names at the end. Is that this? Simply the word regards, not with love, not even my parents, just regards. I gazed at it far longer than I intended. My mug of coffee turned cold as it sat beside me. Outside my apartment, the city charged forward relentlessly. Vehicles, bicycles, the distant drone of building work, all of it faded into silence for me. What I was feeling now wasn't sorrow, nor did I feel furious. It only confirmed that everything I had begun to suspect was, in fact, reality. I no longer belonged to the family, at least not to the side that mattered. Still, more than the act of erasure itself, what truly unsettled me was the timing. On my birthday, it arrived, neither early nor late, but precisely on the day they had once claimed was their greatest joy. Did they erase that memory? Or perhaps remember it and still choose to do this? I hadn't always been the overlooked child. As a young kid, I was dependable, the one quick to assist, always clutching the diaper bag and offering reminders. I always had to remind my dad not to leave the stove running. By age 10, I was already able to prepare 3 full meals. By the time I reached 12, I was escorting my sister Harper to preschool, fixing her shoes when they came loose, and braiding her hair since my mother wasn't skilled at those tasks. Harper was always treated as the youngest, with her gentle curls and tender bedtime tales. Whenever she was upset, everything else came to a halt. But if I shed tears, I was just accused of being overly sensitive. At school functions, my mother would go out of her way to capture attention, posing with Harper right in the spotlight, while I stood off to the side clutching someone's jacket. Even our birthday celebrations showed the difference. Harper's always had elaborate themes: unicorns, dolphins, even the time when a pony was rented. The year it was my birthday, there would be a frozen Isle cake, sometimes arriving 2 days after the actual date. In those moments, I often wondered if I was somehow to blame. Maybe there was something about me that didn't inspire the same kind of affection. But my grandmother, Helen Keeley, never left me doubting her love. She lived just 3 blocks away, in a quaint blue house with a porch swing whose seat was cracked, and a cookie container that was never empty. She didn't own much, but whatever she did have, she offered freely: books, stories, and her company. Harper was the one who showed me how to balance a checkbook before I started high school, how to repair a dripping faucet, and how to keep breathing when I felt invisible. When she became ill with lung cancer, a cruel and relentless disease, I was just 16. My mother struggled with being in hospitals, and my father was always working late. That meant I went every day. I changed her sheets, memorized her medication routine, and accompanied her to every appointment. My sister only visited once. She sat quietly in the corner, posted a picture, and then left before long. But after Helen Keeley, my grandmother, died, I was the one who located her will, hidden inside a copy of Daughters of Tomorrow bookshop, of all places. She left her home, Kingfisher Terrace, to me, along with her car, some modest savings, and a handwritten note. I was the one who remained, not out of obligation, but because I truly saw her. It was never about the money for me. That was never the point at all. What truly mattered was experiencing someone openly choose me for the very first time. When the funeral took place, I could hear the quiet murmurs around us. My mother wore an expression like she'd just tasted something sour. My sister Harper, dressed in white lace and heavy eyeliner, barely glanced my way. A few days later, Harper pulled me aside privately. "I know you ended up with Kingfisher Terrace," she remarked, tossing her hair the same way my mother did when she was feeling trapped. "But I'm in a tough spot. Rent's chaos. Would you mind if I stayed with you for a while?" That very weekend, Harper moved in. She lived with me for half a year, never contributed rent, went through my shampoo and my groceries, and sometimes even took my car without permission. When my sister finally left, she didn't say thanks. She simply disappeared. 3 years passed before I heard she'd told others I had taken advantage of my grandmother. Harper insisted it was strange that I'd received the entire inheritance, accusing me of manipulating an elderly woman to gain property. I never once set the record straight. I never addressed things with her directly, because at that point I realized there was something even more chilling than silence. It wasn't that they had erased me from their memories. They were recasting my story entirely. Still, I can't help but wonder whether Harper ever remembered those evenings when I brought her soup while she battled the flu. Did she ever think back to who comforted her through storms when our mother left the windows wide open? Or had any of that simply lost its meaning for her? After Harper left our home, I began locking all my doors. Not only the front entrance, but the unseen ones inside me as well. The group chats with my parents and Harper ended. No more requests like, "Can you double-check this lease?" Or, "It's only temporary, just until I get paid." I relocated to a single-bedroom condominium closer to White Creek University, where I led night classes. Mostly I taught sociology. It was the sort of class that students enrolled in because it was mandatory, not out of genuine interest. But I actually did care. I found meaning in the patterns and structures, in observing how people reenacted the very cycles they once vowed to break. Gradually, I began to put aside savings, picking up consulting jobs, and agreeing to take on assignments that everyone else passed over. Holiday schedules, reviewing curriculums, late-night video calls with frustrated benefactors. All these tasks I accepted. It was work done in solitude, but the compensation made it worthwhile. After 4 years, I had saved up enough money to create something that belonged to me. A nonprofit called Aspire Bridge Initiative became my project. I provided essential life skills classes to young women about to leave foster care. Reading a lease, detecting predatory lending, composing an honest resume. They arrived wary, but left with newly found confidence. Whenever people questioned what had motivated me, I never credited my parents. Yet I could never help but recall my grandmother, Helen Keeley, and how those in greatest need often struggle to ask for assistance. Then, the feature came out. Gregory Irwin, a gentle and observant local reporter, attended one of our workshops and published a story. He described me as a steady force for transformation. That headline was circulated far and wide, more often than I had anticipated. The news found its way to previous classmates, past professors, and even my parents. A fortnight later, I realized I'd been wiped from my sister's Instagram. Not just blocked, but deleted altogether. Family wedding snapshots were trimmed, childhood images reposted with their captions revised. "Just me and my guardian angels," Harper wrote beneath a photograph, where I had once been standing between her and my mother. At first, I assumed it must be an algorithm issue, some malfunction. But then I spotted the old picture from my White Creek University graduation, the one I had framed as a gift for my father. In the altered version, I was missing from the scene. Someone had literally snipped me out. I hadn't realized that was something people still did. She'd used scissors, some tape, a different frame. No description. Just a photo now hanging in the background of Harper's kitchen in a video tour she filmed after moving into Kingfisher Terrace. The frame was familiar. I was the one who bought it. I didn't weep, but I gazed at that vacant spot far longer than necessary. It crossed my mind. When they revised the narrative, did they ever pause to consider who had laid the groundwork for that opening chapter? It happened on a Tuesday afternoon. Rain tapped the window panes, and a chilled, half-eaten sandwich rested on my desk. I was in the middle of revising grant proposals when the sound of knocking interrupted me. 3 distinct knocks echoed through the quiet, followed by silence. I hadn't anticipated any visitors. Typically, people either called me first, sent a text, or didn't bother visiting at all. When I finally opened the door, I found them standing outside. My mother, my sister Harper, and a man I didn't recognize before, probably in his mid-40s, well-dressed, with a wedding ring on his finger. Later, I'd find out this was Harper's new husband. They seemed prepared, with meticulously styled hair, tidy clothes, and strained smiles. Rachel, my mother, Teresa Randall, greeted me, her voice part breathless, part comfortingly familiar. As a family, we felt the moment had come. They didn't specify for what, nor did they request permission to step in. Instead, they swept past me as if it were still their prerogative. I watched as they made themselves comfortable in my living room. Harper curled up in the corner of my couch, the same way she had in high school, though now she wore heels and a face full of makeup, as if she were pretending to be the girl she could barely recall. Her husband remained silent, responding only with a courteous nod, as if he had been instructed to keep his opinions to himself. My mother began by offering praise, saying how proud she was, and how she always believed I would accomplish something important, mentioning she had shown the article to some friends from church. The request soon followed. My sister and her husband had launched a real estate marketing company. According to her, it had potential, but they required some seed money. The bank refused to grant us the full loan amount unless we had a co-signer, someone trusted, with a solid reputation for reliability. They were asking if I would agree to be their guarantor, just on paper, for maybe a year, or potentially even less. I realized that things had been strained for a while, my mother added, her eyes widened. But family manages to reunite, doesn't it? My sister remained silent. She stared at her hands, just as she had in the past before telling an untruth. I offered neither agreement nor disagreement. I stayed where I was, watching them take seats on my couch. It was the couch I had purchased for Kingfisher Terrace, the home I had made, while they asked for faith they never deserved, using the same voices that once accused me of being unappreciative. I moved into the kitchen, filled a glass with water, carried it over to the coffee table, placed it down, and kept quiet. Eventually, Harper lifted her gaze. "I just assumed you'd get it," she murmured. Her voice wavered, but her mascara stayed flawless. I thought about saying it out loud, reciting every instance when she had failed to understand me. All those times she disappeared, erased everything, and started over. But instead, I simply stared at the water and waited for its surface to settle. They didn't linger, didn't finish the proposal, didn't bring anything to completion. The door softly closed behind them, carrying more weight than if it had been slammed. And I remained there in the stillness, questioning whether they honestly believed I would forget. This time, the envelope hadn't been mailed as certified. It was delivered by hand. It felt heavier and colder in my fingers, containing a civil complaint. My own relatives were taking me to court. The accusation was unjust enrichment. They argued that I had exploited my relationship to claim my grandmother's house and her money. They alleged that I coerced her, kept her away from them, effectively excluding them. They insisted that my sister was supposed to inherit everything, but I had interfered. The document read like a screenplay, casting me as the wrongdoer and Harper, the sorrowful granddaughter, too gentle to object until now. I spent hours alone with these papers, refusing to reach out to anyone or shed any tears. I went to my filing cabinet and retrieved a folder I'd guarded for 15 years. Inside were medical files, handwritten letters, and photographs of me and my grandmother, Helen Keeley, spending time together in her garden during her chemo treatments. I remembered opening Christmas cards I had signed on her behalf when her hands trembled too much to write. The will had been notarized, filed, and stamped by Mason County Courthouse on the very day she passed. I wasn't required to justify my actions, yet I would do so. My attorney was a former student of mine, Morgan Delgado, brilliant and steadfast. Morgan had previously crafted a dissertation examining power structures in inheritance conflicts. When I presented the complaint, she showed no reaction. "We've encountered this before," Morgan remarked. However, she had made an error. I arched an eyebrow. Morgan allowed a faint smile to appear. They provided falsified evidence. Harper Valentine had fabricated documents, emails that were supposedly from Helen Keeley, notes inconsistent with her handwriting, and even an unsigned draft of an updated will dated 2 weeks after Helen Keeley's passing. They hadn't bothered to review the hospice records. By that point, my grandmother had already been unresponsive. We didn't retaliate. Instead, we presented our evidence. Piece by piece, we laid things out, calmly and with assurance. When the day for deposition arrived, my sister Harper Valentine appeared in pearls and a black blazer, as though attending a casual family gathering. My mother, Teresa Randall, sat next to her, looking pale but still managing to appear collected. I barely said a word. I had no reason to add more. Morgan, however, spoke for me, poised, systematic, and with the focus of someone whose entire career had led to a case that practically made its own argument. I faltered under questions about the timeline, first giving one version, then altering it, and then changing it once more. By midday, my attorney asked for a recess. When it reached 2 p.m., they proposed a settlement. Morgan refused. I insisted the facts be entered into the record. 2 weeks afterward, the judge threw the case out with prejudice, calling it a spiteful and baseless effort to warp factual history. From a legal perspective, we had won. Within the family, though, victory had no name. My mother never reached out. My father didn't either. Yet someone forwarded me a screenshot. My sister had shared a story. It was a close-up shot of her face streaked with tears, accompanied by the caption, "Some people will do anything for money, even betray their own family." She didn't mention anyone by name, but it was obvious to everyone who she meant. I powered off my phone and left it off for 3 days. When I finally switched it back on, I discovered a single voicemail from my sister. Her tone was guarded, her voice taut with effort. "I hope you're satisfied. You destroyed it all. Teresa Randall won't talk to me. Our backers withdrew. We had to shut down the branch. I relied on you." Then there was just silence. No plea, no regret. Merely a statement. "I relied on you," as if being needed in the past somehow entitled you to inflict pain again and again. I never erased the voicemail, but I also never replayed it, because by then I had come to understand the most profound reality of all. They didn't turn their backs on me because I let them down. They rejected me because I did not. When they returned a second time, they skipped knocking altogether. Instead, they reached out to my father, Malcolm Randall, of all people. After almost 7 years without a word, his tone sounded abrupt, tense, but not furious. Things had escalated beyond our control. He told me, "Your sister wishes she could change the past. So do Teresa and I." The lawsuit was a mess. But in the end, we're family, and families make it through worse. I didn't respond immediately. I chose to pause, letting the quiet shape our conversation. At last, my father cleared his throat. "We want to invite you to a gathering. My cousin, Wyatt Burke, is getting married. It's going to be a big event with plenty of guests. Your presence would make a difference." I had to stifle a laugh, not out of spite, but because the situation felt so ridiculous. They weren't seeking reconciliation. It was all for the public appearance, because suddenly my reputation held weight. The Aspire Bridge initiative had grown. We now operated in 3 states across the region and had joined forces with a national women's leadership foundation. My photo had appeared on the cover of a local magazine. The headline implied my transformation, stating they never desired me for myself. What they truly wanted was her, the version of me that enhanced their reputation by association. I turned down the request, remaining courteous but succinct. My aunt, Ruth Emerson, phoned me a week afterward. Ruth had always shown warmth, though from an arm's length, her kindness as delicate as a shaking teacup. She told me she understood why I felt wounded. She said that what Harper Valentine did was disgraceful. But then, her tone still gentle, she advised, "But perhaps now is the moment to release it, sweetheart. Everyone's watching. Weddings should be filled with happiness. Try not to let history intrude." That became my takeaway. Try not to let history intrude. It was as if the past could simply be left behind, like a handbag I had the option to abandon. As though they hadn't already let it spill all over the floor and then stepped away. I offered no reply, did not attend, and shared nothing online. On that Saturday, as photos from the celebration flooded social media, sun-drenched, sparkling with champagne, a rented garden in the background, I was nowhere to be seen. I went inside, lit a candle, picked up one of my grandmother's worn paperbacks, and when the doorbell chimed not long after sundown, I peered through the peephole. Standing there was my sister, Harper Valentine, by herself. Her face was bare, her hair pulled back, and her eyes were rimmed with red. She stood in silence, lingering on the doorstep, waiting. Instead of answering, I switched off the porch light and let the darkness speak for me. Harper never made a third attempt to reach me. After that evening on my porch, she didn't send a single text, make a call, or email a lengthy apology to beg for a fresh start. She retreated into her reality of filtered highlights and late-morning yoga, while I remained settled in my own. This wasn't because I harbored resentment. It was due to a new sense of clarity. I realized I no longer craved acknowledgement from her. All I truly wanted was for my story to stop being altered. The quiet that settled over everything was not overwhelming. It was precise, filling just the space they had previously occupied. Nothing extra, nothing missing. When people approached old acquaintances or past neighbors to ask about what had happened, I kept my explanation brief for those who were never quite sure what transpired. They crafted a version of who I was that made it simpler to erase me. There were times they'd push for clarification, asking, "What do you mean?" My standard reply was always, "I was present." They simply didn't want to acknowledge me. That response would always bring the discussion to a close. Nobody ever replied to that, since the truth doesn't need to speak loudly. It doesn't have to be justified or put on display. It only ever requires being voiced a single time. I didn't disown them. I never posted online about it. I didn't destroy photographs or return old letters. I allowed everything to remain untouched, left in drawers, forgotten email folders, and the quiet corners of the house I no longer visited. Some memories don't need to be resolved. They only need boundaries. For me, that was enough. Last spring, I repainted the hallway, choosing a soft gray that felt soothing and uncluttered. I took down every photograph, not out of bitterness. It was purely out of necessity. A layer of dust lingered where the frames had rested. Time had slipped further along than those frozen moments. There was one frame I nearly abandoned. It held a spontaneous picture of Helen Keeley and me together on her porch swing, mismatched mugs of tea in hand. No posing or editing, simply our presence in the moment. However, as I picked up the frame, I discovered something concealed behind it, pressed flat against the wall. Another photograph was there, folded with torn edges. This photo showed my college graduation. A complete version, with me in the middle and my arms around Harper Valentine and Teresa Randall. Before I was cropped out, someone had chosen to hide it there. Perhaps it was me, or perhaps it wasn't. I drew the damaged picture out from behind the glass. I didn't restore it to its place, nor did I discard it. Instead, I left the frame empty and rehung it precisely where it had been. It wasn't an act of grieving for what I had lost, but rather a way to remind myself that the things that are gone don't always have to be replaced. They simply need to be acknowledged. Just once. I stayed quiet, keeping to myself until I eventually found myself alone.